Thank you for finding us again. No stoplights. Want to thank our sponsors, Francis Marion University, Carolina Bank, Micky Finn's, Victor's, Marlboro, MPD Electric Co-op, McCall Farms, Pepsi of Florence, PLC Commercial Real Estate, and our Florence Legislative Delegation. I am proud and honored, and I mean this sincerely, to have such a list of quality and committed sponsors. We share a common vision in that we want to build some sort of media entity or enterprise of which we can all be proud of and evolve into something that we hope we have an announcement sooner than later about the next step of No Stoplights as we grow up from being an infant of a podcast to something other than an infant of a podcast. I'm not sure I know what that is, but we've negotiated with some third parties, and we think we have some pretty significant announcements to make sooner than later. I'm bad about saying things without dotting I's and crossing T's. I've learned the hard way to dot I's and cross T's before you make formal announcements. So I'll leave a formal announcement pending, but we do have some interesting and exciting announcements pending to come sooner than later. And our sponsors have been very, very supportive and involved in our growing up and evolving into something that we hope they'll be very proud to be a part of. Our last podcast, we had a good friend of mine and a political pollster, Robert Haley of Trafalgar. A lot of you found that interesting, intriguing. Robert is a guru in the data world, the analytics of campaigning, the analytics of elections. I'm not. I mean, I'm a backslapping, baby-kissing former politician. I would like to believe that's why Robert and I built such a bonding friendship, and we went through a political crap storm together. And when you do that, you realize who runs out of the building and who stays in the building when the house is on fire. So I'll leave the analytics by and large to Robert. I mean, he expressed the methodologies of which he comes up with his conclusions, the way he goes about making a determination. I think one of the most interesting things Robert said is he's a Republican who polls. I don't know why any of you believe that a Republican pollster who is never right would be continued to be hired by Republicans running for office, or the RNC for that matter. I don't know why any of you believe a Democrat pollster would stay in good graces with the DNC if he provided them with data that was never right. Sooner or later, the rubber hits the road and we get to elections, and polls are all over the place. I believe there are two kinds of polls. I think there are a poll to reflect the electorate. I think there's a poll to affect the electorate. But when the polls that try to affect the electorate aren't effective in affecting the electorate, they have a little pile in their face. They have a little explaining to do. And as the campaign gets closer, you'll notice that some of the media organizations that I argue do polling as a side endeavor and to make a big story and a splash. ABC News, we have a poll coming up at 6:30 tonight. Make sure to tune in. Well, Americans are inclined to give that a little more credence and pay a little closer attention to that. But as we get closer to elections, if you'll notice, the real pollsters really start standing behind their numbers. They are more frequent. They are more entailed. They're more detailed. But ultimately, the person who runs Trafalgar stands behind the data. It's not always right. Sometimes it's within the margin of error. Sometimes it's not. But if you'll notice as we get closer to elections, you don't see a daily Wall Street Journal poll or a New York Times poll or an ABC News. Well, let me back up. New York Times is that's unfair to New York Times. Cahaley said he thinks they do good work. He thinks the New York Times Siena poll is amongst the best. So the New York Times is being disparaged unintentionally here on No Stoplights. But some of the media organizations that I argue are in the news business need to make the announcement of a poll newsworthy. They tend to not do as many polls as we get closer to the election. I argue it's a little bit like the senator who runs every 6 years. He does something to piss off all his voters in South Carolina. There's one who does that occasionally, but he has 6 years to ask you for forgiveness. If you do a poll in June and July and it's far outside the margin of error. In other words, if ABC News did a poll that had Kamala Harris leading Trump by 7 or 8 points, we get to the election and Trump loses the popular vote by 1 point, they're outside the margin of error. But they can say, well, I mean, we didn't do one later. The electorate changed. A lot of things happened between when we did our poll and when the election was actually held. We are recording this podcast 2 weeks to the day from the presidential election of 2024. Who wins? I don't know. I mean, I think the best answer we can ever give, and it's a little bit like our good friend Reggie Armstrong, who has been a partner of our media endeavors in days gone by. When Reggie occasionally is asked if the market goes up or down, I don't know. I mean, we'll analyze data, we'll compile data, we'll try to make heads or tails of the data. But at the end of the day, nobody truly knows whether the stock market will be higher this time next year, lower this time next year. Nobody honestly knows who will be the president of the United States come the end of January 2025. I suspect things. I believe things. I have opinions about things, but none of this is the gospel. It's not in the Old and New Testament. It's not been tested and proven on some of the research we do is so thoroughly investigated, thoroughly analyzed, thoroughly tested and evaluated, and then it becomes kind of a part of the norm. I'm here to suggest certain things to you that are interesting to me and lead me to believe that the eventual outcome will be a Trump victory. And I don't say that as a hack. I don't say that. I mean, I make no apologies for being an America First Republican. I've said that over and over and over again. And I think the most important thing you can do with the audience is to be honest with them. So I'm being honest when I say that I want Donald Trump to win as bad as I've ever wanted a presidential candidate in my lifetime to win, because I think the notion of establishment versus something other than establishment is unbelievably important in America today. And I'm of the opinion the establishment has failed miserably at executing the duties and responsibilities of governing the country's affairs. We need something different. I don't know if Trump is the long-term answer, but is the alternative. And right now we have a choice between what I would argue is an establishment-blessed oriented candidate and something different. And I'm in the camp of something different. But like Robert said, I mean, I can't just allow that to cloud every bit. I can't let the opinion I have about establishment, non-establishment, just make it impossible for me to see the facts. It's a little bit like the Republican who does polls. Sooner or later, if you're a Republican who does polls and Republicans pay you to do polls and you do polls that are never right, guess what? You don't do any more damn polls for Republicans. Same thing with Democrats. So, yeah, I mean, I've got opinions, but I didn't pull them out of thin air nor my derriere. I think they're sound opinions. And I think 2 weeks out, it's important that we try and offer some sort of analysis of where I see the race today. I'm not a guru. I'm not an expert. I'm not a technocrat. I'm not a technicalist, as Elon Musk famously called himself. But I am a guy who's run for office. I am a guy who has I think, an instinctive quality about me that kind of smells where the electorate is, smells where the campaigns appear to be. And here's my argument today, 2 weeks out from the election. Not only do we have a lot of polling, not only do we have betting markets, we are now in the early stages of people actually casting ballots. I looked today before we went on the air. There is somewhere between 18 and 20 million people that have already cast ballots in early voting. 23 states, you identify as a registered Republican or a registered Democrat in 23 states. There are about 5 other states that you register the Voting Act, some of the LBJ policies of equal opportunities for all. There's some digging they do, some questions they ask in some of these states about early voting. I'm taking a long time to say they know whether you're black or white. In essence, that's the point I'm trying to make. So you got 23 states that say, we know that this many registered Republicans, we know that this many registered Democrats have casted ballots. We got other states that say, we know how many whites, how many Hispanics, how many blacks, how many men, how many women have voted. We don't know who they voted for, but we try to take that aggregated data and kind of force it in to some sort of conclusion. It's about as good as we can do today. But once again, the thing we have today that we didn't have several weeks back is we've got polling, got betting markets, but now we have actual votes that are being casted. Let's go to a data. I think this is an important data point. I'm not saying it's the most important data point. It's first on my list, and I think it's important. In the Real Clear Politics average, I went back and looked before we went on the air. Donald Trump was in arrears 7.9 percentage points to Joe Biden on this date in 2020. Let me say that again. Donald Trump trailed Democrat Joe Biden in the 2020 presidential election by 7.9 percentage points. Today, he trails Kamala Harris by 0.8 percentage points. So Donald Trump is 7.1 points better off than he was in 2020, and that is in the popular vote. That is a national election. We know that's not how we choose presidents. We know we use the Electoral College. Some say it's antiquated. Some say it's the way it was intended to be. California's got 2 senators. Wyoming's got 2 senators. California has Electoral College votes. They all go to the person that wins California, whether you win it by 5 million or 1 vote. That's the way it is today. But there is a correlation. There is a correlation in what I call the Electoral College bias. And I believe that if you back up several election cycles, there was a day and time in America that a Republican could not win without Ohio and Florida. I mean, Florida was the swing state. Today, Ohio is red. Florida is red. Donald Trump is going to win Florida. Donald Trump is going to win Ohio. And as a result of that evolution in state from blue or from swing to red, the Republicans gain about a 3% electoral college bias. What does that mean? That means that if Donald Trump loses the popular vote by 3 percentage points, there's about a 50% chance he wins the Electoral College. If Donald Trump loses the popular vote by 2 points, there's probably a 70% chance he wins the Electoral College. If Donald Trump loses the popular vote by 1 percentage point, it's not 100%, but it's getting damn close. I mean, if we get to November 5 and they tally the votes, both early votes and those casted on day, absentee, mail-in, members of the armed services, anyway, we get all these votes in a big pile somewhere, and Donald Trump loses the popular vote. He's trailing today 0.8. If he loses the popular vote by 0.8%, he wins the presidency, probably in somewhat of an electoral college landslide. So that's kind of where we are today. Donald Trump was trailing Joe Biden by 7.9% in the popular vote. He's now 0.8% behind Kamala Harris. Donald Trump leads in what we'll call the battleground swing states by an average of 1.5%. Nevada and Michigan would probably on one end of the swing state in Trump winning. Pennsylvania and Georgia, maybe Pennsylvania, North Carolina, they would be on the other end. And then you got Wisconsin, you got Arizona, you got Nevada, you got all these other states that they're fighting for. On his best day, Trump wins Michigan and Nevada. On her best day, she wins Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia, and somewhere in the middle is Arizona. Some argue Arizona's a better state for Trump. I don't know that I buy that. I still think, for whatever reason, Pennsylvania may prove to be a little more reliable for Trump. But when you look at that and you really try to be honest about evaluating where we are today, it looks to me like, and I think we did a podcast a while back, and I think a lot of the experts agree with me, I don't think the 7 swing states break 4-3. Something tells me that we're in the midst of one candidate gaining momentum and the other candidate in decline. I'm going to be honest. It looks to me that Donald Trump is gaining and Kamala Harris is declining. That's my perspective. That's my evaluating some of the data, some of the analytics, hearing some of the expert opinion. And having said that, it's more likely to me that the 7 swing states are not split 4-3 or even 5-2, but someone wins those 7 states 6-1 or 7-0. I don't think it's unheard of that Trump wins all 7 of the swing states. If something happens on the other side in the next 2 weeks, I don't think it's unheard of that she wins all 7. But I think that scenario is more likely than someone winning, 4-3. Now, I didn't say that they would win the 7 swing states comfortably. I think they'll be close. I think every one of these swing states will be within the margin of error. I don't see any candidate winning any of these swing states. Let's say the margin of error in the polls 3.5%. I don't see a candidate, Republican or Democrat, winning Pennsylvania by more than 3.5, winning Georgia by more than 3.5, winning Nevada by more than 3.5. So every one of these states is going to be in the margin of error. And the pollsters can say, yeah, we picked her to win by 1. He won by 2.5. We're within the margin of error. And technically they are within the margin of error. But right now it looks to me, and I'm a Republican, I'm an America Firster, I'm going to vote for Donald Trump, but I'm going to shoot you straight. It looks to me, 2 weeks from Election Day, that all the momentum is to Trump's advantage. We're talking about early voting a second ago. 2020 was a weird election. We had a lot of shenanigans. I guess some were probably to be expected. Some were in the realm of creativity a little more than made many comfortable. I'll let that be. I'm hesitant to say some things that others are very comfortable in saying. But the Republicans were at a distinct disadvantage in early voting. But they got killed in early voting. The ground game, the organizational structure of the Democrats was just far superior to the Republicans. I don't know what's happened. I'm not involved in the RNC. I'm not boots on the ground in a swing state. But I'm estimating or speculating that the Republicans learned a hard lesson in 2020 that you can't go into Election Day that far behind. You've got to compete in some way, shape, or form at a place that you can make up the gap on Election Day, because the polls clearly show that Democrats like casting their ballots early. Republicans like casting their ballots on Election Day. But when you look at the states that you do register as a Republican or a Democrat when you cast a ballot, the Republicans have closed the gap significantly. Fairly significantly. I'm not talking about, 1,000 here and 1,000 there and a couple of thousand here and a couple of thousand there. I'm talking about in registrations, and I'm talking about the number of people who register as a Democrat, the number of people who register as a Republican. In America today, about 44% of the voters register as a Democrat. About 41% register as a Republican. Some of the others are non-affiliates. 44 plus 41 does not equal 100. So therefore, you've got some independents, non-affiliates, libertarians, and for whatever. You got a lot, Green Party, but there are a lot of other places that people who don't call themselves Republicans or Democrats can find a home. But once again, we got polling, we got betting markets. Poly market, I think today has Trump at about 63 or 4% likely to win. Real Clear Politics and some of the averages have him at about 60%. I've said for a couple of months it felt like, and this has no analysis to back up what I'm about to say, it feels to me like Trump wins the Electoral College 2 of every 3 elections. He wins the popular vote 1 of every 3 elections. That's a big reach. Republicans have not won the popular vote since either 2000 or 2004 when George W. Bush ran, but they have this Electoral College bias as a result of Ohio and Florida becoming non-swing states and pretty dependable voting for the Republican. So as we conclude, I'm not a guru, I'm not an expert, I'm not Robert Cahaley from Trafalgar, I'm not the Cook Political Report, I'm not a pollster at ABC, CBS, or NBC. I'm a guy who does 20 hours a week for conservative radio. We do a podcast every single week. I study this relentlessly. I am a man of limited acumen, but I'm not a moron. And now that the polling, the betting markets reflect an advantage to Trump, I think as we have actual votes being cast, it'll be interesting to try and keep up with the registration percentages in some of these 23 states that you register as a Democrat, Republican. What was the margin between Democrat and Republican in these 23 states in 2020? What is it today? I don't think the Republicans by any stretch will outvote the Democrats in early voting, but they're closing the gap by significant margins in some of these 5 states where The civil rights legislation keeps up with how many blacks are voting, how many women are voting, how many minority Hispanics and other minorities are voting. I don't want to get the weeds on that. It's pretty interesting if you want to take a deep dive into the math of these politics. But once again, I think one of the most important, it's not a popular election vote. I mean, this is not the person that gets the most votes win. Some don't like that. Some do. That's a battle for another day. And if you want to change the Electoral College, check into how heavy a lift that would be if indeed we traveled that road. But I do think it's important when you look at the popular vote number. And in 2020, once again, Donald Trump was down to Joe Biden 7.9 percentage points. Today, he's down to Kamala Harris by 0.8%. He's up in the battleground and swing states by an average of 1.5. I think he's up about 2.8 or 9 in Pennsylvania. I think he's up about 1. He's got a lead in every single battle state today. Robert told you Nevada is hard to poll. You got unions and culinary workers, and you got mobile transporters that get people to the poll. I'd like to say that some of the unspokenness, some of the things we can't measure are kind of twofold, and I can't answer that. I mean, I think I can look at the data. I think I can kind of digest the data points and make a reasonable conclusion that 2 weeks from Election Day, I'm bullish Trump, bearish Harris. It's not because I'm a Trump fan, not because I'm a Republican, not because I want America first to be the political movement of my era. I just think it's hard to argue that the momentum and the data doesn't favor Trump as we speak today. Now here's the unknown. I've read, as you have, because if you're watching this, you're politically inclined. I've read, as you have, that African-American men are going to vote for the Republican Donald Trump at a higher rate than they ever have. How many have voted yet? I don't know. How many will vote? I don't know. We know how they responded to pollsters, but I don't have any idea. Will the African-American male who's historically voted for the Democrat, will they take that leap of faith? What did Trump say? What do you have to lose? Will they do it this time when they historically have not done it? I'm not an African-American male. I'm not in that room. I don't know how they hash out some of those decisions. The African-American community has been a very, very dependable block of voters for Democrats throughout history. Is this the first election when Republicans made significant inroads in the African-American community, in particular with the African-American male? We know what the polling says, but I don't know how they vote. The Hispanic switch, are we talking about Arizona, Nevada, in some places, North Carolina and Georgia, the Deep South, there's a pretty significant Hispanic population. Are the Hispanics voting tendencies in 2024 going to reflect what the polling? I don't know. Don't have any idea. We anticipate that they will, but once again, we've not tallied the votes yet. So those are two things that are squishy at best. African-American males, Hispanics in general, they've historically voted for the Democrat. They're telling pollsters they're not voting for the Democrat this time. They're going to vote for Donald Trump and the Republicans. Will they? We shall see. The second point I want to make, and I think this is the most interesting point, we're talking about Trump down 0.8 nationally in a popular vote. He's up 1.5. I believe the battle of all battles, the fundamental difference in this election will be Trump's historic overperforming to polling. Donald Trump historically has overperformed to polling by somewhere between 1.5% and 2%. The Democrats overperform because of their ground game and get out the vote efforts. So we can't quantify that. I mean, there's no number you could put on a sheet of paper and say, okay, in 2020, Donald Trump outperformed his polling by. In 2024, he subsequently outperformed his polling by. So we know he'll do it in 24. In 16 and 20. We don't know that. I mean, we know what he did in 16. We know what he did in 20. We don't know what he'll do in 24. We estimate that he'll overperform polling because he historically has, but we don't have that data yet. We got polling, we got betting markets, we've got 20 million-ish votes that have been cast. And I know this because someone asked me, hey, man, you're mighty bullish on Trump. What are you most worried about? And it's the Democrat turnout machine. They're damn good at it. I mean, they do a better job of getting their people to the polls by any means necessary. They do a better job, and some like the way they do it. Some don't like the way they do it. Some of this is probably above board. There may be some of this that is kind of under the table, but there is no question that the Democrats' obsession to be in control of power and the energy they exert to make sure they win elections has always outpaced the Republicans' desire to be in control of government. That's how I see it. And I really and truly could break it down. In this corner, you've got Trump outperforming historic polling. In this corner, you've got a turnout machine, ground game, unlike any political party in history has ever had. That's kind of where we are. The data does not reflect what is that worth and what is that worth. But as we proceed over the next 2 weeks, I think we'll have a lot more clarity, because I do believe that Republicans understand now, let's go ahead and bank that vote. On election day, my kid may be sick, my car may break down, the boss may give me an extra assignment at work, so I'm going to take the Republican suggestion and make my way to a precinct, make my way to an election office, and make sure that I get my vote in and get it counted. At the next podcast, I want to go through the Senate and the House. It's kind of an interesting, if Trump does win and he wants to reform Washington and do some major things, and I'm talking about with tariffs and health care, whatever. I mean, whatever 2 or 3 things that their administration decide are their priorities, it's going to be a hell of a lot easier if he's got a majority in the Senate and the House. So with our next podcast, I want to kind of circle around the Senate and the House to give kind of my opinion of what the data says there. I want to conclude by thanking you for finding us. I would ask you to subscribe, to like us, to the YouTube channel is somewhere you go to find us. Subscribe. That really helps us get this product out and about. But I want to thank our sponsors once again, the Florence County Legislative Delegation, PLC Commercial Real Estate, Pepsi of Florence, McCall Farms, MPD Electric Co-op, Victor's, Micky Finn's, Carolina Bank, and Francis Marion University. Without those folks, none of this nonsense would be possible. Thank you.